Life Youth, I'm Jared, and hope you're having a good day today. I want to tell you a story, something that you might not know about me, which is probably a lot actually, because we don't know each other all that well. But this one you probably definitely don't know about me, or maybe wouldn't have guessed. I've only lived in Michigan for about 2 years. Before that, lived in Minnesota for 13 years, close to Minneapolis. But before that, I lived in Iowa. I grew up in Iowa, northwest Iowa, a very small farming community. And one of the three jobs that I had as a high school student growing up, just to try to make some extra cash, I worked at Hy-Vee, which is a grocery store. I worked as a livestock auction helper, and then I worked as a corn detasseler. Two of those things you probably don't know what they are. At a livestock auction, that's where animals are bought and sold: cattle, sheep, goats, pigs. In northwest Iowa, the main livestock that came in were cows and pigs. And so one of my jobs was to put these little metal clips, almost like the size of a paper clip. I had to clip it into the pig's ear for identification. Sounds a little strange. Every once in a while, though, we would get different animals in. We would get sheep in, and that was nice because sheep were not. We didn't have to put the things in their ears. But the thing about the sheep is you had to sort of direct them through these like gate hallways, passageways, to get them to the spot where they were going to go, and they were going to be for a couple days before there would be an auction. And I was used to working with pigs, used to working with cows, not so much used to working with sheep. And so when the sheep would come, it was like a whole different kind of experience. It took probably two or three, four times longer to get the sheep to go to the pen where they were supposed to go versus the cows and the pigs. The cows were just afraid. So you would have this little like sort of plastic stick, and you just kind of hit the ground and they would run. They just flinch. Pigs are actually pretty smart. I know it seems strange, but they're actually really, really smart. And after a while, you picked up on some cues on how to make sure that they would go. But sheep, not so smart. Pretty dumb, actually. I apologize if you don't use that word in your household, but these are very not smart animals, and but also, not only are they not smart, but they follow each other. So um, you've got the level of stupidity sort of it compounds upon itself. They're just not smart together. It's not like strength in numbers. It's actually decreased strength and decreased mental capacity in numbers. And so it's just really frustrating to get the sheep to go where you needed to go, and you only had a certain amount of time to get stuff done, and before the auction would actually take place. So it was kind of frustrating. I talk about that because Jesus talks about sheep a lot. I try to bring a prop. This is the best one I could find. This is Lammy or something. That's what my kids call it. But I think there's a lamb character in the show Doc McStuffins. You guys might be a little too old for that if you watched Disney, but this is the closest prop I could come. So I know this sheep looks very put together and is coordinating with its colors, the pink and the white and all of that. But don't let this fool you. Sheep are not actually all that smart. They might be cute, but they're not smart. And so Jesus talks about sheep a lot. Not just the animal, but he actually makes a connection between the character and the mental capacity of sheep and says, actually, y'all are like sheep. So whenever Jesus starts talking about sheep, it's a moment to perk up and to be like, oh, wait, Jesus is calling me dumb, kind of, by comparing me to a sheep. But then there's this other spot in John chapter 10 where he actually talks about sheep quite a bit. But then he talks about his role with the sheep. And it's not so much that he's calling us stupid, but he's actually compassionate in our circumstance. toward our state as sheep. And he's saying, look, I'm actually here to take care of you because I feel bad for you as a sheep. Let me show you what he says in John chapter 10, verse 11. He says, I am. Okay, let me pause there because you're in a series called I Am. You're in a series about the I Am statements of Jesus. If you want to know what Jesus is all about, you look at what he says about himself. And oftentimes he has these I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd is what we read here in verse 11. I am the good shepherd. Not just any shepherd, I'm the good shepherd. The shepherd that cares about his sheep. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. A hired hand will run when he sees a wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him, and he isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. The hired hand runs away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. Let me pause there for a second. In first century Israel, if you're a shepherd, you're with the sheep day in, day out, constantly. And here's the thing. You're out in the wilderness, you're out in the pasture, you're out in maybe desert area, depending on where you are in Israel. Northern Israel, there's a little bit more vegetation. Southern Israel, there's nothing. It's brown, there's no water, there's no pasture. So trying to raise a flock of sheep in the southern part of Israel would be very, very difficult. But also, you've got jackals, you've got wolves, you've got other predators who might be in the area who are looking for some food, and they're going to look to the sheep. And so it's a dangerous job. It's a smelly job. It's a thankless job. And so the fact that Jesus is referring to himself as a shepherd and as a good shepherd says something about his character, that he's willing to care for these sheep who are vulnerable, who are oftentimes in danger in their world. And so that's what he's talking about. Sometimes a hired hand might come along and take care of the sheep, if the shepherd just for whatever reason can't take care of them, but they're not with the sheep regularly, so they don't care. They're just in it for the money. But the shepherd who actually tends to the flock, who's in charge of that particular flock, it's like family to them. They do everything for that sheep. It is their livelihood. And if they were to lose a sheep to a wolf, or to lose the whole flock because a wolf comes in, or a jackal or whatever, that's it. That's the end of their job. That's the end of their income. And so this is a big, big deal. Him just talking about what a shepherd would have been like in the first century. But then he goes back to talking about himself. In verse 14, I am the good shepherd. He says it a second time. I know my own sheep, and they know me. Just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father, so I sacrifice my life for the sheep. I have other sheep too, that are not in the sheepfold. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. So when Jesus talks about the fact that he is the good shepherd, that I am statement that he makes, he's making a big statement about the case of humanity, that we are weak, we're vulnerable, we're sometimes stupid. Actually, we might be a lot of times stupid. We don't make a lot of great decisions. We're destructive to each other. We're mean to each other. We gossip about one another. We're violent towards one another. You turn on the news. Actually, don't turn on the news, but all you have to do is turn on the news and be reminded about how broken and vulnerable we are as a human body. And yet Jesus says, I'm actually going to give up my life for the sheep. I'm going to be a sacrifice for the sheep. Now, here's the other thing about sheep, is that in the Old Testament, in the temple practice, the sacrificial practices, the priests would sacrifice a sheep, and that would represent sort of their forgiveness of sins, called atonement. And it seems like a weird practice to us in the modern world, but they would kill a sheep or a goat or something like that, and that would represent the sin of the people. And so if you kill that sheep, well then, when blood is shed, that represents that now new life can begin. So death has to take place for new life to begin. Jesus, in talking about the Good Shepherd, talking about himself as the Good Shepherd, is not only talking about, hey, I care for you, I love you, I want to take care of you, and you know my voice, and all of that's good, but he's also hinting at the fact that there's going to be a sacrifice that takes place. That he isn't just talking about some random metaphor that he gives up his life for sheep in the way that a shepherd would, try to fight off a wolf so that the sheep are okay. It's actually going to come to fruition. He's going to go and he's going to be sacrificed. He's going to be considered the sacrificial lamb for all of the people. John the Baptist refers to Jesus as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. The whole world. Not just a small group of people, but Jesus says, I have other sheep too that are not currently with us, but I must bring them also. Here's the great truth about Jesus as the Good Shepherd is, if he's just a shepherd, he's the shepherd of his sheep. But if he's a good shepherd, any sheep that come into his fold, he's going to take care of. So I get this picture of Jesus saying, I want everybody part of the fold. And I'll be their shepherd, and they will be one flock. I want the whole world to come to know me. I want the whole world to come to recognize that I want to love them sacrificially, and I have loved them and will love them sacrificially. And so he goes to the cross, which is the season that we're getting ready for in Easter. There's a lot here. There's a lot to think about as Jesus referring to himself as the Good Shepherd. I want you to think about, and I'll put some questions together for you, but I want you to consider yourself as a sheep. Vulnerable, sometimes weak, sometimes making stupid decisions. If you could admit that, it takes humility and maturity to recognize that, I probably don't always make the greatest decisions. I just kind of go off wherever I want to. And to recognize that Jesus wants to draw you to himself. I also want you to talk about in your small groups the fact that he says, my sheep know my voice. Would you say you know the voice of God? How do you know the voice of God? How do you listen for the voice of God? I'm not saying an audible voice necessarily, but how do you determine when God is speaking? What does that look like? So I'll ask some questions in the small group questions, but I'm praying for you. I pray that you recognize Jesus is the Good Shepherd in your life that cares for you, wants to protect you, wants to bring others alongside of you, and wants you to be part of his whole flock, not just in this world, but in the world to come, a world where he redeems all creation, rescues us. I'll be praying for you. Enjoy your small group time. I'll see you soon.